May 4th, 1945. Off the coast of Sakishima Gunto, Okinawa, Lieutenant Seizo Yasunori grips the control stick of his Mitsubishi A6M0, diving at over 350 miles per hour toward the gray steel behemoth, cutting through the Pacific swells below. Around him, for other aircraft plummet in their final missions, he whispers a prayer to the Emperor. The British carrier HMS Formidable grows larger in his windscreen. He has been told this dive will change the tide of war. He is about to discover how terribly wrong that promise was. Before these, do you have any memories of World War II? I wish you good health. The morning sun breaks across the East China Sea, casting long shadows over Task Force 57 of the British Pacific Fleet. Vice Admiral Sir Philip Vian stands on the bridge of HMS Formidable, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he surveys the formation. For fleet carriers cut through the water in perfect formation, formidable, indomitable, victorious, and indefatigable. Their accompanying battleships, cruisers, and destroyers create an impressive screen, a floating fortress of British naval power operating 8,000 miles from home. These are not the carriers the Imperial Japanese Navy has grown accustomed to fighting. Unlike their American counterparts in Task Force 58, operating just miles away, these British vessels carry a distinctive advantage that will soon prove its worth in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Beneath the flight decks where Corsairs and Avengers prepare for launch, 3 inches of hardened steel armor plate covers the hangar decks. The Americans opted for wooden flight decks to maximize aircraft capacity and allow for easier repair. The British, drawing from harsh lessons learned in the Mediterranean against German dive bombers, chose protection over capacity. It is a choice that will save thousands of lives. In southern Japan, at air bases scattered across Kyushu, young men in white headbands prepare for missions from which there will be no return. The Kamikaze Special Attack Corps has become Japan's primary naval weapon, a desperate gamble born from mounting losses and dwindling resources. Vice Admiral Mato Magaki commands these operations, coordinating waves of suicide attacks against the Allied fleet, supporting the invasion of Okinawa. His pilots have already scored devastating successes against American carriers. USS Franklin, struck on March 19th, suffered over 800 casualties and nearly capsized. USS Bunker Hill, hit on May 11th, would lose 396 men and be knocked out of the war permanently. The British carriers represent new targets. Intelligence reports describe them as smaller than American fleet carriers, potentially more vulnerable. What Japanese intelligence has failed to grasp is the fundamental difference in their construction. This misunderstanding will lead to shock and confusion as pilots in their final moments witness their sacrifices producing incomprehensibly minimal results. Lieutenant Seizo Yasunori receives his orders during the pre-dawn briefing at Kanoya Air Base. He is 22 years old, a former university student who volunteered for flight training in 1943. Like thousands of young Japanese men, he has accepted the honor and burden of the Takotai, the special attack. His Zero fighter, stripped of armor and excess equipment to maximize fuel and explosives, carries a 250-kilogram bomb. With his 4 squadron mates, he will target the British carriers operating west of Okinawa. The briefing officer points to reconnaissance photographs showing the distinctive silhouettes of British carriers. These ships support the American invasion, he explains, his voice steady despite the grim nature of the mission. Your success will isolate the enemy forces at Okinawa. The Emperor depends on your courage. Yasunori writes a final letter to his mother, as tradition demands. He signs his name, drinks a ceremonial cup of sake, and walks to his aircraft. Ground crew members bow deeply as he approaches. Someone has painted cherry blossoms on the fuselage, symbols of samurai spirit and the beauty of death and service. He climbs into the cockpit, runs through his checks, and starts the Sakae radial engine. The propeller spins to life with a throaty roar. At 0630 hours, 50 lift off from Kanoya, banking south toward the target area 400 miles away. They fly low over the water to avoid radar detection, skimming the wave tops as the morning light intensifies. Yasunori watches his fuel gauge carefully. There's enough for the journey to the target, but none for return. Not that return is planned or desired. Aboard HMS Formidable, radar operators detect the incoming bogies at 0815 hours. Multiple contacts bearing 045, range 40 miles, closing fast. The call to action stations rings throughout the ship. Within minutes, 1,200 men are at their posts. The ship's Bofors and Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns traverse toward the threat axis. On deck, crews scramble to secure aircraft and clear the landing area. 4 Supermarine Seafires launch to intercept, their Merlin engines screaming as they claw for altitude. Captain Philip Rakeen, commanding Formidable, stands calmly at his station. He has fought through the Mediterranean and Arctic convoys. He knows his ship. More importantly, he knows what those 3 inches of armor can withstand. All guns free to engage on identification, he orders, his voice carrying the steady confidence that keeps men focused in crisis. The Seafires intercept the Japanese formation at 20 miles, diving from 8,000 feet into the deck-level approach. The lead pilot, Lieutenant Commander Michael Crosley, triggers his 20mm cannons at 400 yards, walking his fire into the first zero. Tracers puncture the fuel tank. The Japanese aircraft explodes in a fireball, pieces tumbling into the sea. The remaining 4 Zeros split formation, 2 continuing toward Formidable, 2 breaking toward HMS Indefatigable, steaming 2,000 yards off the port quarter. Yasunori sees his wingman disintegrate. He banks hard right, pushing his throttle to maximum power. The British fighter overshoots, unable to match the Zero's turning radius. He has seconds now. The carrier grows rapidly larger, its gray deck crowded with parked aircraft. He can see men running, gun crews tracking him. This is the moment for which he has prepared his entire adult life. Anti-aircraft fire fills the sky with black puffs and glowing tracers. A 40mm Bofors round clips his left wing, tearing fabric and damaging the aileron. The Zero shudders but holds together. Yasunori corrects his dive angle, aiming for the center of the flight deck where the greatest damage can be achieved. His final thought is of his mother, of cherry blossoms in Kyoto, of the honor he brings to his family. Impact. The Zero strikes Formidable's armored deck at the base of the island superstructure at 0827 hours. The explosion is massive. Aircraft fuel, ammunition, and the bomb detonating simultaneously. A fireball erupts 200 feet into the air. Metal fragments scythe across the deck, killing 8 men instantly and wounding 47 others. Parked aircraft are blown overboard or catch fire. Black smoke boils from the impact site, obscuring the entire forward section of the ship. On the bridge, officers brace against the shockwave. Damage control reports flooding. Fire on the flight deck, casualty reports coming in. Multiple aircraft destroyed. Captain Rakeen waits for the critical information. Has the deck been penetrated? Has the hangar deck been compromised? The answer comes within seconds. Deck inspection reports no penetration. Armor intact. Fire is superficial. What would cripple an American carrier, sending it back to Pearl Harbor for months of repair, is for Formidable a manageable emergency. The armored deck has performed exactly as designed. The Zero's impact and explosion occurred entirely on the surface. The 3-inch steel plate, angled to deflect bombs, has completely absorbed the attack. Below, in the hangar deck, crews continue preparing aircraft for the next sortie, barely aware of the drama above. Damage control teams rush to the impact site with hoses and firefighting equipment. They find a crater in the deck, but only 2 inches deep, gouged into the armor without breaching it. The fire is fed by aviation fuel from the destroyed Kamikaze and damaged British aircraft, but the flames cannot penetrate to the hangar below. Within minutes, the fires are under control. By 0845 hours, just 18 minutes after impact, repair crews are sweeping debris overboard with brooms and shovels. The sight is almost surreal. Where American carriers would be listing evacuating wounded, and fighting uncontrolled fires spreading through wooden decks and exposed hangar spaces. British sailors are literally sweeping wreckage into the sea, as if cleaning up after a storm. At 0909 hours, Formidable resumes flight operations. Corsairs land and launch as scheduled. The ship remains fully combat effective. The second Zero, following seconds behind Yasunori, witnesses this impossible result. The pilot, Petty Officer Takeshi Kosuge, has already committed to his dive when he sees the explosion on Formidable's deck produce no apparent lasting damage. Confusion floods his mind. He has been told that such attacks cripple enemy carriers, force them from battle, achieve decisive results. Yet the British ship below continues steaming at full speed, its guns still firing, its aircraft still launching. There is no time for doubt. Kosuge adjusts his angle slightly, aiming for the deck edge where armor might be thinner. He pushes into his terminal dive, anti-aircraft fire converging on his aircraft. A 40mm shell explodes in his cockpit, killing him instantly. His Zero, now piloted only by momentum and fate, strikes the sea 50 yards from Formidable's hull, causing no damage beyond a dramatic spray of water. The two Zeros attacking HMS Indefatigable meet similar fates. The first is shot down by the carrier's concentrated anti-aircraft fire at 400 yards, disintegrating before reaching the ship. The second strikes the after-flight deck at 0832 hours in a successful kamikaze impact. The explosion kills 14 sailors and destroys 2 parked aircraft. Smoke and flames engulf the stern. Yet again, the armored deck saves the ship. The kamikaze's bomb and fuel explode on the surface, unable to penetrate the steel below. Damage control teams extinguish fires within 20 minutes. By 0920 hours, Indefatigable is recovering aircraft. Light damage to the deck edge requires only temporary plating, installed while the ship remains at sea. The carrier never leaves the combat zone. These incidents on May 4th are not isolated events. They are the beginning of a pattern that will repeat throughout the British Pacific Fleet's operations. On May 9th, HMS Formidable is struck again by a Kamikaze Zero that hits near the forward aircraft elevator. The explosion kills 11 men and wounds 24. Fires rage across the deck. American liaison officers, observing from escort vessels, prepare for the British carrier to withdraw for extensive repairs. Instead, they watch in amazement as British crews extinguish the fires in 25 minutes and resume flight operations 50 minutes after impact. Admiral Vian signals to Admiral Rawlings, commanding the British Pacific Fleet, "Little yellow bastard." It is the most emotion the stoic commander displays publicly, but it captures the fleet's grim satisfaction. Their ships are absorbing punishment that would devastate American carriers and remaining in the fight. On May 14th, HMS Formidable suffers her third kamikaze strike in 10 days. This attack is particularly severe. A bomb-laden Zero crashes directly into the forward flight deck while aircraft are being refueled and rearmed. Secondary explosions from aviation fuel and ordnance kill 30 men and wound scores more. The forward section of the deck becomes an inferno. Smoke visible for miles suggests catastrophic damage. American carriers nearby prepare to receive Formidable survivors and aircraft, assuming the British ship is finished. Instead, within 90 minutes, Formidable is again operational. The armored deck, though scorched and dented, has not been penetrated. The hangar deck below remains intact and operational. By evening, the carrier is launching strikes against Japanese positions on Ishigaki Island as if nothing had happened. HMS Victorious experiences her trial by fire on May 9th, when a Kamikaze Judy dive bomber penetrates the combat air patrol and anti-aircraft screen, striking the flight deck near the island superstructure. The impact and explosion occurred directly above the operations room. The blast kills 6 men instantly and wounds 26 others. Flames spread across the deck, igniting parked aircraft and fuel lines. Captain Michael Denny, commanding Victorious, immediately orders damage assessment. The response is almost routine. Armor intact. No hangar penetration. Fires contained. Within 1 hour, flight deck is cleared and operational. The ship never reduces speed, never breaks formation, never ceases combat operations. The pattern is undeniable. British carriers are absorbing multiple kamikaze strikes, attacks that would sink or cripple American carriers, and remaining combat effective within hours. The armored deck design, initially criticized by some as reducing aircraft capacity and operational flexibility, is proving its worth in the most dramatic way possible. American liaison officers with the British Pacific Fleet send detailed reports to Admiral Nimitz and Admiral Halsey, commanding the U.S. 3rd and 5th Fleets. The accounts seem almost impossible. Carriers struck by kamikazes and back in action within hours. USS Enterprise, struck by a single kamikaze on May 14th, requires months of repair at Puget Sound. HMS Formidable, struck 3 times, never leaves the combat zone. The contrast is stark and unavoidable. American carrier doctrine emphasized maximum aircraft capacity and operational flexibility. Wooden flight decks could be quickly repaired with materials available on any ship. This approach worked brilliantly against conventional attacks, but proved devastatingly vulnerable to kamikazes. When a suicide aircraft struck an American carrier, the impact often penetrated the wooden deck, and fire spread rapidly through the hangar, fuel stores, and ammunition magazines. Secondary explosions would tear ships apart from the inside. British carriers, accepting reduced aircraft capacity and the weight penalty of armor, could absorb kamikaze strikes that would gut an American ship. The 3-inch steel deck functioned as both shield and fire break. Explosions occurred on the surface, where damage could be controlled and repaired quickly. The ships remained structurally sound and operationally capable. For the Japanese kamikaze pilots, this realization, when it came, was devastating. Pilots in later attacks, witnessing British carriers absorb strikes and continue fighting, faced a terrible truth. Their sacrifices were achieving nothing. The honor, the duty, the final service to the Emperor, all rendered meaningless by 3 inches of steel. Lieutenant Yukio Seiki, credited as the first organized kamikaze pilot in October 1944, once said, "Japan's future is bleak if we are ordered to die like this." His words took on tragic irony when applied to attacks on British carriers. Pilots were still ordered to die, still accepted their fate with courage and dedication, but the tactical results were negligible. They exploded against armored decks that barely dented, against ships that swept away their burning wreckage and fought on. Japanese intelligence eventually identified the armored deck issue, but the information came too late and offered no solution. Kamikazes couldn't carry bombs large enough to penetrate the British armor while maintaining the speed and maneuverability needed to reach targets. Heavier aircraft couldn't get through the defensive screens. The British carriers had found the kamikaze's weakness. They were optimized to destroy lightly built targets and were nearly useless against armored ones. Between April and August 1945, British Pacific Fleet carriers were struck by at least 8 kamikazes and numerous near misses. Total time out of action for all strikes combined, approximately 12 hours. No British carrier was withdrawn from combat operations due to kamikaze damage. By contrast, American carriers struck during the same period. Franklin, Bunker Hill, Enterprise, Hancock were all removed from combat for months or permanently. The human cost tells part of the story. HMS Formidable suffered approximately 80 casualties from 3 kamikaze strikes. USS Franklin suffered over 800 casualties from 1 strike. The armored deck didn't just save ships, it saved lives. British sailors below decks, protected by the steel armor, survived attacks that would have killed their American counterparts. Captain Ruckeen of HMS Formidable later wrote, "The armored deck was vindicated beyond question. We took punishment that would have destroyed other ships and remained effective. The cost in British lives was tragic, but without that armor, we would have lost hundreds more and possibly the ship itself." Admiral Vian, commanding Task Force 57, noted with typical British understatement, "The armored deck proved most satisfactory." In private correspondence, he was more candid. "I watched kamikazes hit my carriers and failed to sink them. It was the armor. Nothing else could have saved us. The Americans, watching British carriers absorb kamikaze strikes and fight on, began immediate studies on incorporating armored decks into future carrier designs. The USS Midway-class carriers, already under construction, featured armored flight decks. Post-war American carrier doctrine would include armored decks as standard, a direct result of lessons learned by watching British ships survive what American ships could not. For the Japanese kamikaze pilots, the British carriers represented an unexpected and terrible reality. Their ultimate sacrifice could be rendered meaningless by engineering and steel. Lieutenant Yasunori, diving toward HMS Formidable on May 4th, believed his death would change the course of battle. Instead, it became a statistic, his sacrifice absorbed by 3 inches of armor and forgotten within hours as the carrier he struck continued fighting. The philosophical implications haunted surviving Japanese officers. The kamikaze strategy, born from desperation, depended on each pilot's death achieving significant tactical results. Against British carriers, this calculus collapsed. Pilots still died with honor, but their deaths accomplished nothing. It was a uniquely modern tragedy. Courage and dedication rendered obsolete by industrial capability. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, the British Pacific Fleet's carriers had operated continuously in the combat zone for 5 months despite repeated kamikaze attacks. Not one British carrier had been withdrawn for repairs. Not one had been sunk or seriously damaged. The armored deck, controversial in design phase and criticized for reducing operational capacity, had proven itself the single most important defensive innovation in carrier warfare. The lesson was clear. In the age of suicide attacks and increasingly powerful weapons, protection mattered more than capacity. Better to operate fewer aircraft from a ship that could survive attack than maximize capacity on a ship that one lucky hit could destroy. The British had learned this lesson fighting German dive bombers in the Mediterranean. They applied it in the Pacific, and it saved their fleet. For the young Japanese pilots who died attacking British carriers, there were no monuments, no recognition of their impossible situation. They were expected to die, and die they did, but against armored steel that simply absorbed their sacrifice and swept the debris away. It was, in its way, more terrible than being shot down before reaching the target. At least then, they died in combat, uncertain of success or failure. Those who struck British carriers died knowing, in their final seconds, that their attack had failed, that the ship would fight on, that their death changed nothing. The British Pacific Fleet returned to Sydney in August 1945, carriers scarred but intact. Crews scrubbed scorched deck plates, repaired cosmetic damage, and painted over the burns and dents left by kamikaze strikes. Within weeks, the ships would be redeployed or returned home, their war service complete. The armored decks that saved them would influence carrier design for decades, a lasting legacy of engineering triumph over desperate tactics. In Japan, in the years after surrender, families of kamikaze pilots mourned their sons and brothers, finding what meaning they could in sacrifice and duty. But for those who attacked British carriers, for men like Lieutenant Yasunori, who died believing their deaths would matter, the truth was harder and colder. They had struck ships designed to survive exactly such attacks. Ships where 3 inches of steel transformed ultimate sacrifice into mere inconvenience, where honor and courage were defeated not by superior bravery, but by superior engineering. The armored carriers of the British Pacific Fleet didn't just survive the kamikazes. They rendered them irrelevant, proving that in modern warfare, steel and science could defeat even the most fanatical courage. It was a lesson written in fire and blood across scorched flight decks that refused to break, a testament to the cold calculus of industrial war, where the better engineered side survives regardless of its enemy's willingness to die.